Hi, I'm Brandon with Pulse-Fired Gaming. We lost about half of our video for this interview due to some shenanigans with Sony and their recording length. So you'll see the live video and then you'll see a lot of B-roll. That's what happened. I apologize. It won't happen again. Ooh, that was nice. Hello and welcome to Pulse-Fired Gaming. Today we have an interview with our guest, Brad Reynolds. And we are speaking into a microphone between two moons.
That's no moon.
All right, Brad. Before we get started officially, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I live here in Houston, Texas. Brandon and I have been friends for a number of years. He's the one that actually got me into this particular plethora of gaming nonsense that you see in front of you. I work over at Johnson Space Center. I'm a contractor for NASA. I do visualization graphics, either still graphics or animations or 3D printed models, that sort of thing. Anything that tells the story of what NASA needs to go on their exploration missions going forward.
You recently had a video from NASA about Mars colonization? Or is that visualizing what that would look like?
So, yeah, the most recent thing that happened this last Sunday, if you're talking about that one, that was the Chapea habitat, which is a habitat they have on site. It's a simulated Mars mission in which a bunch of astronauts, so to speak, go into this habitat that they've created, and then they simulate what it would be like for the next year of living on Mars. They don't have any contact with the outside. They have this one area on the outside of their habitat, which is like this little L-shaped area that has like these fabric walls and stuff that is supposed to be where they do their EVAs. Okay. So they need a place outside to be able to practice, okay, we're doing on EVAs and stuff. And so the department there contacted my department to say, hey, we'd like to have some sort of Mars landscape on these walls here because it's just going to be made of fabric and stuff. And so I had to figure out how to project like a Mars landscape on this decidedly not like geometrically straight surface. So I had all of these things. And anyways, it was fun to work with them on that project there. But you've probably seen some of my work if you've looked at anything that is related to the Deep Space Gateway for NASA. That's been one of the things I've worked on for the past 10 years before it was ever actually a public thing. Just visualizing what that might look like.
Okay.
A lot of the Artemis graphics, if you'll see, either has my fingerprint on it at some point. 2 years ago, I went to Johnson Space Center's the visitor center over there, and it was fun because I walk through and I see like some of my stuff like either up on the monitors, or there's this big wall of like some astronaut. It's got a printed graphics of some astronauts on Mars, and I'm like, hey, I designed those models. Those are there permanently now, so it's kind of fun to see them in the wild. But you never know that they're actually mine because a lot of my stuff never sees public eye.
Okay.
It's just internal use only.
So did you happen to see any slackers sneak into that Mars habitat?
I don't think so. I haven't even gotten to go see it, and it's right across the place. I was supposed to go and have a nice tour of it, but the guy who I worked with on getting those graphics printed up, he was like, yeah, I'm going to take you on a tour, and it just never materialized. So next year,
maybe next year,
unless they want me to suit up as like an extraterrestrial and go sit in there. And this is a first contact moment that you're practicing for.
I'm pretty sure so far the only inhabitants of Mars are robots at this point. So
maybe bacteria. We don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. All right. What started your love of starships?
So I'm born in 1982. I have 5 older brothers, and they are all of an engineering background. So as you can understand, there is a lot of science fiction stuff that was brought up in my house when I was a kid. And so I kind of piggybacked on anything that they particularly liked. I mean, we had bootleg copies of Star Wars before it ever came anything. We watched Star Trek all the time, whether it's the movies, Next Generation, that sort of thing. My brother, just older than me, had the Nitpicker's Guide to start the Star Trek series, so we would go through and, nitpick all of the different things in the episodes. And we actually found a couple things that weren't in the nitpicker guide that we had to submit for the next version that came out.
That's awesome.
Anyways, so along with that, when I got to be, just as like a creative individual, I always liked being able to create things. So when I was in, I want to say around end of elementary school, junior high school, I would just, I was always an artistic person. I was always sketching things and stuff before I knew that I was much better at modeling things than drawing things. And so when that happened, I actually still have some of these things. I would design entire fleets of ships just on these, 8.5 by 11 pages, and have these entire fleets and stuff that I would make. And that kind of brought me along on my career of like, how do I bring all of these creative skills into a career? So I actually pursued industrial design in college. So I was a product designer for a couple of years in the mobility industry because I wanted something to be able to use my practical skills on that. But after a while of being constrained to earthly manufacturing techniques, so to speak, I just didn't want to feel constrained to that. So I went and got some better education on doing more CG stuff. And that's about the time when 3D printing started to come about, like consumer-based 3D printing. I had to use some more like bigger Stratasys 3D printers at work, but we could never print anything personal on that. It was too expensive. So just about that time that like the Rip Wrap and the first Prusa's started to come out, that's when I started to get that. And then of course you invited me over for a game of Full Thrust, and I looked at this and I'm like, I can make this a little better, and I can make some of this my own.
Well, and that was, I think that was the start of definitely something. I remember, like 3D printers. I remember we were in our hotel hiding from Hurricane Harvey. I started putting 3D models onto Shapeways.
Yeah.
So I could have 3D prints at home, and I hadn't really landed on a scale yet.
Yeah.
That's all Cameron's fault, the scale that we ended up going with. But then Danny from Miami, the 3D printing DM, did his video on the Ender 3, and oh my gosh.
That was a game changer, the Ender 3. I mean, love or hate it, that's like the thing that I think opened up the door for so many other people to be able to do some of this stuff on your own.
And I still have one of my first Ender 3s right there. It's not in use anymore, but eventually we'll find someone who will be willing to take it.
Yeah.
Well, that went into how you got into 3D modeling. What software do you use to 3D model?
So for all of these ships that you see right here, these were all modeled in Fusion 360.
Okay.
It's a procedural modeling program, CAD-based program. And the reason I started using that was that I could get more precise dimensions. Because I use, at work, I'll use a couple different things. I'll use either Modo or Blender, have a Maya background as well, Cinema 4D. There's all sorts of tools you can get there.
Yeah.
We used Modo a lot because it was really good at polygonal modeling, but the problem with that is that for the stuff that I do for like graphic work, you just use really low res models and then you fake the rest with textures.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't really do that it just took way too much energy to try and do that with the polygonal modeler. And so I wound up doing it in Fusion 360 with a lot of these just because I could do a procedural thing, which is basically like if you're programming a model, you can start way back here and say, I want these dimensions to be this size. And then further along, you're like, oh, I need to change this. So you go back to that particular step, change your dimensions, and everything else is supposed to update.
Supposed to.
You have to do a lot of troubleshooting on that. So one reason is when I get into the block-in phase and I'm trying to figure out the like proportions or features of a particular set of models, if I don't like the way that one is going, I don't have to like basically do a whole lot of rework. I can go back to that particular step, change dimensions, change proportions, and then everything else, if I've programmed it right, updates accordingly. Second thing is also I can actually calculate easily the center of mass on these, which is very helpful for something like if you're trying to figure out where your center of mass is to put a post in.
Yeah, and I've had to deal with that when resizing things like this guy or this guy, and I need to make sure that like it came with keyholes for our Star Wars Armada, but they're not in the right place for the size that we're scaling them, so I have to move them. And a lot of times I do it manually.
Yeah.
Like I'll put a peg on a thing and then line up the ship so it balances, and then I'll go into the 3D model and put that where I put it on the real thing.
Yeah.
It's weird.
There's different things. Like, there are a lot of models I can point at and say, okay, I modeled something in where I shouldn't have, and so then I know these are going to be off balance because I couldn't put the keyhole where it needed to go.
And this guy, we taped this guy on here. This is off balance, not because it was not balanced right in the software, but because I went in to make it easier to fit on Star Wars Armada stands.
Yeah.
And these are like 100.1 scaled, so they're a little looser on these stands than they are on the official stands. What is, not limited to your own creations, we'll get to that, but what is your favorite starship?
Oh, that's a hard one because there's so many good ones out there. If I want to say there's one that I have a particular love of, I really love the design of the Rocinante in The Expanse.
Such a good ship.
It's not huge, and it feels like, I mean, they really put into some real thought behind the whole physics of everything, behind how it's all supposed to go. Like, yeah, there you go. The Rocinante. And I just love the fact that it's, I don't know, it feels the most real of most of the starships I've ever actually seen on a screen or something like that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, there's a lot of behind the scenes things, but I'm a hard sci-fi guy. And unfortunately, my career at NASA has really ruined me to science fiction in so many ways. I watch so many television shows or movies, and I'm like, yeah, if they're trying to if they're trying to show NASA stuff, then I'm like, yeah, they wouldn't be doing that.
Yeah,
I have to bite my tongue a lot of times when I'm watching shows and things like that.
I ended up reading Endurance by one of the Kelly brothers. I think it's Scott Kelly.
Yeah,
and the way that he talks about NASA really like beat up on the idea of NASA being like this perfect safety oriented group, where it's really like, oh wait, this is actually a government agency, and that you get all the things that come with that.
Yeah.
Including like starship design, stuff like that.
Yeah, unfortunately for realism purposes, I mean, with NASA, you're constrained. If you want a human to be in it, you're constrained to either a cylinder or a sphere for the inside, just due to
the pressure.
Air pressure. And unfortunately, that doesn't align itself with a lot of cool design work.
Yeah, you get a lot of bulbs.
You get a lot of
cylinders
and spheres and other things stacked together. So.
Yeah. Okay. Can you remember what the first thing that you 3D modeled was?
So, if you're talking like very first time on a computer doing 3D modeling, this was back when I was in high school, and this was when the first emergence of consumer level 3D programs were coming out. Mm-hmm. And there was a program called Bryce 3D.
Yes.
Way back in the day, you could create some amazingly cool stuff for those of us that, you know, were growing up during the 1990s. You could create some amazing stuff that on your own home computer, you know, it'd take 30 minutes to render a 640 by 320 size image. But I would make a lot of landscapes and stuff in that because they had a cool thing than that. But I think one of the first times where I actually sat down and I said, okay, I'm going to try and model something that was like all inclusive. I made an interior of a house, or just like a study or something. I had like a bookshelf, and I had a telescope. And the thing is, I was all using just primitive models. I was like, okay, cylinder, mm-hmm. Boolean this cylinder out from this. And it was not anything that like I would look at now and say, oh, that's wonderful, because it was just, it was terrible. Some of the scale was off, and because, you know, you had to look at everything in wireframe, I wasn't getting the scale of one thing to another correctly and everything. So that I would say was the first time I actually put a passion project in of like, I want to make something in 3D that looks, you know, it probably looked like the early days of Myst. Okay. A couple steps down from that. Yeah. But I mean, I was a high schooler and just trying to learn it on my own. So it was one of the first things I actually modeled. When I got into college, that's when I could actually get into using things like SolidWorks or something like that to actually make better things.
I didn't really even understand what SolidWorks was or what it existed until my friend like my friend and I grew up together, and we were at high school. He went to like Mount Hood Community College, which was the community college that my wife went to and I went to. And he learned, like, he was doing stuff in AutoCAD and SolidWorks. I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy stuff. And it's awesome. It's awesome tools that.
I have a brother, one of my older brothers is a mechanical engineer, and he introduced me to a lot of stuff like that. And so I got exposure to it before I could ever professionally get to do it. So yeah, it's a big help there.
All right, so on the table we have all I think all of your factions.
I think
that
all
you've
of them
designed
to this date that have been created.
We have the United Texas Republic, including the Alamo class space station or starbase. We have the Gathrum,
the Garathian, I think.
Garathians. We have the CSA. We have
the
Orion Republic.
The Order of the Dark Star.
Order of the Dark Star. These were all 3D printed by my print farm. This is resin. That's FDM. That's FDM. These are resin. That's not his.
I'm not going to take claim for that.
The CSA fleet is in resin. The Orion Republic is in FDM. They're all sitting on stands that you designed, and we actually have examples of generational designs here.
Yeah.
Between the original generation of stands that we love, that were two pieces that you'd sit on top of each other. The first generation of the captive stands, which are amazing for what they are. They're very quick to print if you have a 3D printer, and they're really inexpensive. And then we have the second generation of the captive stands. And what were you thinking when you had the independent stem from the clock face and the arcs?
So on this one, we have been playing the rules. It's basically a full thrust of, you can only you're always going to be pointing in the direction that you're traveling. And the idea behind this particular dial stand that we have is that you could be traveling in a particular direction, but then orienting your spacecraft another way to do sort of like, I don't know, the Battlestar Galactica, the Expanse type thing of being able to have 6 degrees of, well, I guess in our case, it's just 2 degrees of translation here, or 4 degrees of translation, to be able to, I'm going to fly this way, but I'm going to turn my ship this way so that all my weapon arcs are pointed in a certain direction. Yeah,
you mentioned the Expanse, which is prevalent. You see a little bit of that with the fighters in Battlestar Galactica, but you also see that in Babylon 5, especially with the Star Furies being omnidirectional, where they'll continue with their thrust vector, but be facing the other way so they can engage an enemy.
Yeah.
So that's a very cool stand. We haven't...
This was the first thing I ever designed for our gaming group. Was the stance, and I'm like, because we were using I don't remember what we were using, but I'm like, I can make an aid for this.
Yeah.
And so this is where everything kind of started from, was there, and then on to the United Texas Republic.
We started with full thrust, or with we were playing full thrust because the idea was that we wanted a miniatures agnostic gaming system.
Yeah.
And full thrust does have miniatures, but the rules are agnostic.
Yeah.
They can be. So we were started with these, and if you're playing full thrust where you're wanting to deal with the specific arcs on there, the 30-degree arcs, these don't really fit for that. They work, especially if you have a template. I bought a couple of acrylic templates, which I don't have handy, but they work, but they're not great. So you came up with these where it's very easy to delineate where the center of the stand is, the arcs, the course change on there, and you basically incorporated the whole movement and arc system of full thrust in the stand. And I think that's pretty awesome.
Now look where it got us.
Yeah. What would you say, and I know that this is like asking a parent who's their favorite kid, but what is your favorite faction that you've designed?
Oh, that is a hard one to do. I can tell you what I like about certain ones. one of my favorite ones that I like, if I was to just fly in the ship myself, I would want it, is the Core System Alliance one. But that's mainly because this one takes a lot of influence from the Anaconda from
Elite
from
Dangerous.
Elite Dangerous.
Yeah.
I love the shape of that one. This one has like a speedboat type thing, and I know that there's a sentiment somewhere sometimes that wedge shaped ships are kind of cliche. It's a prevalent design.
Yeah.
But so if I had one for myself, I would pick that. There are certain things about like I love how many greebles and Nernies I could incorporate on the Orion Republic just because
all the
paneling, the
turrets, the
bumps,
engines.
That took forever, especially in Fusion 360. But I was so proud of the way that those turned out, just because you have all of this like exposed structure on it to say, okay, this isn't a sleek-looking starship, this is an industrial warship, sort of thing. But then you go on to the Order of the Dark Star.
Oh, and I love these ships.
These ships were just, I wanted to create something that was like, if these are actually inspired by if you go to the Air Force Academy in Colorado, their cathedral there. Mm-hmm. It's a bunch of lined up triangles essentially, and the lofts between those two. But that's kind of what the inspiration for the design for these was brought up as. Just these really sharp lines of like, if you built a cathedral in space that was a warship, what would it look like?
What? Probably something like that?
Yeah. So those, in terms of like some of my favorite aspects of some of the things I've designed, are what I would point out there.
I'm pretty sure on our tabletop, the CSA has gotten probably the most amount of play out of all of them, and that might be a size thing, that might not. I love the things that I loved about playing with these and painting these are the little grids, and you see this on these tiny micro grids that
they don't turn out in resin very well, but they turn out well, or they turned out well in resin, not too much in FDM.
Yeah. I mean, you could probably, with a 0.2 millimeter nozzle, get them to turn out better.
Yeah.
But you're still going to have not the same tessellation. Like, you can't see it here, but the little grid patterns that are in here are just these flawless little hexagons. Because, hexagons are the best of gun. But it's just utterly beautiful, beautiful designs. Now, we've only got the CSA listed on our Etsy store, but we need to get all of these up. I need to do some reprints on these and on these two. But once those are done, I can get them listed. That's been the main goal with printing and painting the UTR in resin, is I want to get people exposed to them.
Yeah.
Because they've sold, I think, 3 or 4 sets of these, and they're lovely, and they're easy for us to print, and they're really lovely, and they're great. Of course, we've sold dozens of stands. People really like the stands.
They're a helpful tool.
All right.
Real quick. Yeah.
What is your least favorite faction?
That's easy. The Garathian Empire.
The Garathian Empire?
Yeah.
Why?
Partly for me is they're hard to print. And also for me, it's like, all right, how much of that is really just, it's a Star Destroyer without the mast? I don't know. I made them. I wanted to have something that you could see like gun ports just sticking out the side everywhere. I don't think I really did that a whole bunch on some of these, because like one of the first ones I created was the UTR right here, and you can see they've got turrets.
Lots of turreted weapons.
Either stuff on the side or on the front, or things like that. There were just like a couple of significant guns, and I wanted something where you could see like this has something covered everywhere up on the front and things like that.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 18 clusters on the sides. The big bottom.
I don't know what those
missile
are.
launchers or whatever. They're greebles. You can assign whatever greebliness to you, and then the big giant plasma cannon on the bottom.
Yeah. And so for them, I don't know. I looked at them because honestly, this is based off of design I did when I was a teenager, where you have this cutout, or this engine shape, and then you have a little cutout area for the engine to stick inside. And this is something I designed when I was like a teenager, something like this. But as I bring it into 3D and I look at it now, one, it's really hard to print. these things
Yeah.
on FDM, because usually I'll print in this orientation and this does not stay here.
That's not
I mean,
going to
you can
fly.
see, they're supposed to be straight, but they don't ever print straight. So I got to figure out, I think, a better way. And that's part of what has inspired some of my modeling stuff, is I try to figure out a better way to make this look good, but also be like, maybe I have to split them apart for being assembled in print.
Yeah, like with this one, this was the first one that you released to me.
Yeah.
Where it had components that were specifically designed to be easier to print.
Yeah.
Where the engine section and the main fuselage is separate, and then the engine cones themselves are also separate. And then you came out with these guys. Mm-hmm. Now we have, this one is just the 3MF. Just as is, so those are all the guns where you've put them in the 3MF, and this one was the guns. The main guns are all printed separately. The side guns are integral to it, but all the turreted weapons on the top and bottom are separate. In fact, you can see that this still has spots for 2 more weapon systems on the bottom that we didn't populate. Do you think you're going to do more of that in the future, or more of the hard greeble stuff?
I think, I mean, it's going to depend a couple things on scale. This was a perfect scale to try out, and especially because this kind of came back to when I first designed this thing. These are all of the turrets you see. These are all part of the models.
Yeah,
and so that runs in. You run into a couple different problems if you're printing where you've got to support these things. Sometimes they don't come out correctly. Sometimes they do. But I wanted to, if I went back and I redid this fleet, I would actually separate these turrets from the model to make it easy enough to print. And so that's kind of what I was thinking when I was going along this path. If I have like big details like that, like turrets, which is what I'm coming up with on this design, on this fleet design. If I have something like turrets, I may separate them out. I mean, I'll put them in there as like the 3D MF, where you can just have all of them and print them in place, and they should be relatively okay because they're like straight on contact and there's not enough space between them, so they'll print out just fine. But if you want to be able to print them off separately and move them around to different orientations and stuff, because I think these are all pointing forwards, but if you want to get down to the really nitty gritty details, your turrets might be facing all sorts of different directions when you're flying it, if you like those types of details and stuff.
Yeah. We printed this one. This is the 3MF that had all the turrets already in place. And we hollowed this and then printed it, I believe, either straight down or down at an angle to get the best results. And while you can see on here, you could see some tiny little boogins from the supports. The rest of the model looks pretty terrific. Yeah. And that was just using auto supports.
Yeah.
We use Lychee these days. We bought into the Lychee Pro thing, and I don't know if Lychee Pro is the way to go, but I like their auto support system. I don't like their hollowing, so I still do all my hollowing in Cheeto Box, which is the dumbest workflow ever, but it is what it is. Okay, so we have FDM, or like regular 3D printing, Ender 3 kind of stuff. Then we have resin prints. Mm-hmm. What do you prefer when manufacturing starships?
Honestly, I love the highest detail I can get. I mean, I don't have room for a resin printer. So any resin printing, I just come to you and say if I need resin printing. But I wish I would have one of those at home, because I love the level of details that come out of that and the speed of manufacturing you can do when you're doing that, rather than you're doing an entire layer at once rather than just printing off a line of each layer.
Toolpath, yeah.
Yeah. And so, I don't know. There's a good balance between that of me, like, if I was, you're not going to print the Alamo Station in resin.
No, not at that scale.
Not at that scale. But, I think it depends on scale for your own personal preference. Or for economic purposes, I would say depends on scale.
Yeah. Printing a 28 millimeter scale Starship.
Yeah.
It's done. Some guys do it in resin, but I could not imagine, because this guy, or this Traveler, the Type S, I think is 4.5 kilograms. So that's in in PLA.
Yeah.
That we're saying 24, 60, 80. That's $90 worth of material just to print that out.
Yeah.
But in resin, it would be probably $180 worth of material.
So in my industrial design days, we would actually, I worked mobility products, like wheelchairs, scooters, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And we would get prototypes made of that, but the prototype, like the things that existed were now I forget the process, what it's called. It's a laser. It's much like resin print. It is resin printing, but instead of...
Is it the powder?
No. It's a big vat of UV curable resin, but instead of using a screen to print off of, they actually just have a mirror and a laser that traces a path.
So you're talking like actual SLA.
SLA, yes. That's the process. Excuse me, I couldn't think of it. But these are like big, huge 3 foot by 3 foot vats.
Yeah.
Of getting prototypes of stuff out of that. They're, this big out of SLA. And I love the detail that came out of that. Strength was not there at the time, but yeah. And then we had our own in-house printer that we would create for smaller parts and stuff like that. So again, it's the economy thing. If you're just getting into doing this and you want to try something, I would say that, I don't know. Both of them are kind of cheaper now than they used to be.
They're so much cheaper now.
This is more, I think FDM is a little bit more user forgiving.
Yes.
Maybe not user friendly, but more forgiving than doing it in resin. So if you're trying to say, do I get a resin printer? Do I get an FDM printer? I don't know. I think it depends on how much time you're willing to invest in it. Because once you get a printer that is calibrated correctly and you understand like the ins and outs of it, you can create some amazing looking stuff in FDM.
But it takes time to get that
put into that. And even with resin, I don't know. You're the one that's the resin guy. There's a huge learning curve in that.
The problem is that resin, like especially on the scale that we do it on, where we have 3 large or medium format resin printers going pretty much 24/7 to make sure our inventory is up and our special orders get done in a timely manner. That is a very messy process. The resin, which is toxic to your skin, you have to wear gloves. It gets sometimes you'll have hollowed out a model and it'll have a pool of resin sitting there. So when you tip over the build plate to scrape off the build or the parts so you can clean them, you'll have a big glob of stuff. So there's a messiness factor to it where like our printers are messy. The FDM printers, we have 2 Bamboo Labs P1Ps. Those are messy, but when I am ready to clean up the dining room that's now the inventory room, I'm sorry, Julie. That's just a matter of turning on the shop vac and going, wee.
Yeah, you've just illustrated the point why my wife won't let me get a resin printer. So.
But like, if you have a Micro Center near you, you can get an Ender 3 Pro for $99. If you go on like Anycubic's website or like Elegoo's website, they have resin printers for like $130 now. Resin printers, like I bought I got into resin printing with the OG Anycubic Photon, and the printer that you can get for like $130 now is like 8 times better resolution and faster and so much better.
They've made some good strides in the past years. I'm really happy for them.
They have. It's definitely you can
Happy for us.
You can see the result of competition in between manufacturers, because like the Bamboo Labs P1P came out, and prior to the Bamboo Labs printers going on the scene, the fastest thing you could have was a Voron kit, where the Voron isn't a company, it's a project, and you can build your printer to go super fast. But now, so Bamboo Labs came out, and their printers print like my stuff. I'm regularly printing at like 250 millimeters a second, whereas now that is mainstream, there's the new Elegoo Neptunes are that fast. The new Creality K1 is that fast. The Anchor Make M5 is that fast.
Yeah.
Prusa is faster with their Mark IVs. They're not as fast as those printers, but they're faster. And so all of a sudden, like, it's really easy to find a good printer, and it's cheap. It's awesome.
Capitalism, kids.
Yeah. Woo, capitalism and the decline of humanity. Woo, woo. Okay, so some of these are painted. Do you paint your own ships?
I do paint my own ships when I have a chance to do it. I don't. I got 4 kids, and I don't have any dedicated space to call my own. Aside, not even my computer desk anymore is my own. It's all the kids, and so like if I get out stuff to paint, I have to do it on the kitchen island. That's where I set up everything to go do my painting because it's like a perfect height, it's a perfect size for everything and stuff. So when I get the chance to paint, I do like to paint my own. I was a kid who had a lot of models of the
like AMT models or something like that.
Yeah, and so I had a number of things. I had a Deep Space Nine model. I had Klingon destroyer model and a bunch of Enterprise models of different sizes and scales and stuff like that. But in my hometown, no crafts. Like if you wanted hobby stuff like that for paint, you go to the craft store, which the section is this big of where the Testoros paint are, and if you have the paint there, that's your choice of what your starship is going to look like.
And those are all enamel paints.
They're all enamel paints. Yeah. Half of them are glossy, and you're like, I don't know what to do with this. So I never actually got the chance to like do things correctly when I was younger, and so I see all these amazing models and stuff out there growing up. Either in catalog
brand. Like Vallejo or Army Painter or Citadel?
I use Vallejo paints, most of it. That's what I started off on, and they all fit together in my case that I have for them.
Didn't your wife buy you like a really nice airbrush, like the whole airbrush set?
Yeah. That was my Christmas present one year, was a whole big airbrush case of like, I don't know, 200 or so paints. Or maybe it wasn't 200, but it was a significant amount.
Yeah.
It's mostly like World War II appropriate color scheme paints, so stuff that like I don't really look at being well for like starships and other sci-fi things that I do, but they still look fantastic when I actually get to use them. So he's going to be in his 80s. Anyways, he's in his 80s. He's going to be 84 this year, but he will play with us occasionally. But we play Battlefield 2, which came out in 2003, because we do not want to try and have to teach him how to load up a different game. It's that painful, but we'll still go through and we'll play together on that.
Yes.
So,
all right, I got a hard question for you.
Yeah.
What keeps you motivated to model new starships?
I think part of that is just I've always considered myself a creative person. I mean, I have shown that ever since I was a kid, where I like to create things. For me, I like world building. I'm not somebody who's going to sit down and probably be able to ever type up a novel. But I love the chance to be able to create a world, or in this case, create a faction, give them a short backstory, give them to somebody and say, what are you going to do with this? That's one of the things why I like about these different things. Like if you ran a campaign, say your campaign was, okay, these guys, the lore behind them is they want to, the Order of the Dark Star, they want to convert everybody to their religion. And if you're not in their religion, you're a heathen and therefore need to be destroyed.
Are these guys humanoids?
Yeah, they're humans. They're
humans.
They're religious zealots.
Oh,
like
pointy guys.
What does your story come out like that? How does it turn out like that? And that's one of the things that I like about it. I mean, people will play the games they like to play, but I love to create worlds. Like the idea behind the UTR, the United Texas Republic, was the United States collapsed sometime in
in the space future.
In the space future, and it started to divide into different factions. And Texas had enough energy resources and economy to create their own nation and launch into space and into being their own colony. And so, like, with that, how are you going to play if you're doing like a grander scale thing? How would that turn in play? Or Texas is going to say, our space is so much bigger than yours.
Yeah. What challenges have you met in modeling, and how did you overcome them?
Oh. One of the biggest challenges for me is actually finishing a model set, because I love to create different. If you go into my digital folders in Fusion 360, I have over 100 different concept shapes where I'm just like, how do I start defining the language of a fleet? And I will get this overall shape in, and I'm like, okay, cool. then I look at it and I say, okay, I got to put in panel lines. I got to figure out all the turrets. I got to figure out the engines. And once I get to that stage, I'm like, it's so hard to want to keep going after that, because it's in Fusion 360, putting in all the panel lines and stuff, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It is a lot of work because you're putting them in individually. So I'm exploring different ways of trying to do 3D modeling. If there's a way that it can get me to that particular instance faster, I'm exploring some options inside of Blender that might help me get that.
Have you seen the Blender, it's procedural panel? It's panel generation.
I have not seen that. No, I'll have to take a look at that.
I don't know enough about Blender to make it work well, but it's kind of a cool. It's kind of a cool idea that you could have something the software do your paneling for you.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that I think I struggle with is the balance of what to put on visually for a ship, because there's a balance. If you have so much stuff on there that there's no like focus point, like that's a cacophony of different shapes that it's kind of hard to say. I mean, it's got texture and stuff like that, but in terms of 3D modeling, if you're looking for something that's cool and sleek, it's hard to keep a balance between that. This thing in particular, I think this is a good example of a good balance, because you've got a lot of it is just flat faces and stuff, but you have these my little hot rod engines, that I call them right here, just little tiny details that are not the same as everything else. That's why I like this design so much, is because there's tiny little things that make you have a lot of uniformity of the model in terms of like its visual surfacing, but you have little things that pop up to give it a little bit of visual flair, a little bit of a difference, to draw your eye to that particular area.
Greebles with a purpose, basically.
Yeah. So not just having like panels to have panels and stuff. The panels have to make sense.
Okay.
And I think I can't remember what faction it is, or at least somebody's models that I see online, that I love how simple and clean they are. They only have a couple of major panel lines on them, but they got a great shape, and they have just the right enough amount of detail that makes it really, really interesting on there. But I can't remember the name of whoever it is that does it.
It's probably, if you've seen it in the Facebook groups that we hang out at, it's probably either Todd Pote or Charles Owens.
Yeah.
It's probably one of those guys. But there are, these days in those groups, there are so many creators. That's the reason why we started making this show, is because there's a lot of creators out there, and I think we should have more people be exposed to them.
Yeah.
We already answered that question. Okay, so I think it's time to wrap up.
Okay.
How do people find you and what you make?
So all of the completed factions that I have are on Colts 3D under the username BW Reynolds. That's where you'll be able to find the digital files you can buy. The whole fleets are kind of cheap. I think it's like $6, $7 for the entire fleet. And you can print off as many as you want. The dial stands are there as well for like $1 or $2, something like that. It's mainly enough money for me to be able to justify doing it, so I can keep taking my wife out on dates. That's usually how much I get out of it, which is fine. And my own personal website, which I'm terrible about updating, is rfxdesign.com. That's where it has some of my digital work from either where I work now, what I've done in the past, and I should probably start putting some of these things on it as well. I've had the desire to be able to put some of those on, to be able to showcase some of them, as well as some of my own personal 3D print projects that I've done that aren't really for sale, but they're just for, art's sake.
That gorgeous Cobra-like ship that you have.
Yeah.
Man, that thing looks so good.
It's sitting in my office over at NASA right now. But
all right. Do you want to offer a freebie to our viewers?
A freebie?
Yeah, like, I don't know, a ship?
A ship?
Yeah.
Tell you what, I don't think I'm ever going to finish this particular faction right here. This was the original blueprint for what these turned out to ultimately be. So this particular model, yeah, I can definitely give this one. This was the original for the
BSG.
The BSG, the Black Sun Guild.
Yeah,
it's supposed to be a mercenary guild, a bunch of freelancers. I couldn't get past. I like this particular shape, the cigar shape, but I couldn't get past into doing anything else with it. So that's where it kind of laid right there. So
all right,
to give that one up.
We'll have a link in our description to where you can find that, as well as Brad's website and his. We are an authorized 3D printer of his stuff. So if you don't own a 3D printer, but you want some of the cool things that you have, visit us on Etsy and message us there if you don't see something listed already, because we have a lot of stuff that's available but not listed.
And you can print this for much smaller.
Yeah.
We don't have to be that big.
This is the original scale, and we would recommend either half scale or quarter scale, so it doesn't take up your entire table.
This is before I had a 3D printer of my own.
All right, thank you very much for watching. I hope you really enjoyed this. This has been a project that we've been stewing on for a little while. Like it, share it with a friend, comment, tell us how we can improve our interviewing style. I have never really interviewed someone on camera before. That may not be that big of a surprise after watching the finished project, but leave a comment telling us what you think, and if you want to see more content like this, feel free to subscribe. You've been watching Pulse Fired Gaming. My name is Brandon. Have a great day.